Welcome to Shout It Out, a Glittermen podcast hosted by Warren Paul and Andy Chamberlain. Episode 7, All Because of a B-Side. Our theme is courtesy of Glenn Greenwood and John Springate. That's Gary Glitter's first single, Rock and Roll Part 2, from the German TV show Disco 72. This seems to be a rare example of German pop TV from the period where the producer or director, or maybe someone else, understood the song and the performance. The punter or audience microphones are pushed right up. Consequently, the sound mix works beautifully, and there's an astonishingly vibrant German studio audience. It looks like everyone's having fun, particularly John Springate, who just joined the band. If you'd like to see and hear the complete performance, use the search term Rock and Roll Part 2 Live on YouTube. It should come up as a second clip. Hi Andy, the title of this one is All Because of a B-Side. Now that's not a great name, but maybe better than In the Beginning?
I think it'll make more sense, sound more appropriate as you go through the podcast, hopefully. I'm all for mixing up and not using hackneyed titles like In the Beginning, so it's fine.
Well, I guess let's see what the audience think, eh?
Yeah, it'll make sense as we get further into the podcast why you've chosen that.
We'd love to have played part of the first Gary and Band TV performance on Top of the Pops, which went to air on the 22nd of June 1972, but even though the episode exists, a couple of performances are missing, including Rock and Roll. That may have been Gary and his Becky Band's first TV performance, but the song had been performed the week before on Top of the Pops, featuring Gary accompanied by Mike Leander on guitar and half a dozen non-musician friends in Mike's first and only Top of the Pops appearance.
So appearing with Gigi the next week were John Russell, Harvey Ellison on saxes, Jerry Shepherd on guitar, and Ray Moxley on bass, with John White on drums. So people may know these guys were members of the Boston International, an act that spent most of their time in Germany over the previous 7 or 8 years. Although they played mainly in Germany from 71 to 72, they were regularly playing in the UK. Fortunately, they happened to be in the UK as Rock and Roll Part 2 started climbing the charts.
We've been very lucky to be in contact with a Boston International fan, and I never thought we'd find one. Anne Baton. I'm sure there will be many listening to this podcast who were, like ourselves, gobsmacked when Anne suddenly appeared with some live photos of the Bostons on Facebook a couple of years ago. Anne was a keen follower of the Bostons during 71-72, and the icing on the cake is that as well as being a keen photographer, she kept a diary. We were planning to start this podcast from early 72 when a certain lead singer was sacked from Boston International, but after speaking to Anne, we'll begin a little earlier.
So Anne first saw the Bostons in May of 1971, and this was in her hometown of Hornsey, which is on the East Yorkshire coast. She saw them many times over the next year, and the following are venues in the Hull area where Anne saw the Bostons play. There was Malcolm's, the Cherokee Club, the Trog Bar in the Manchester Hotel, and Leconfield Aerodrome. She also saw them perform at venues further afield, one of which was the Top Rank Club in Doncaster, or the Top Rank Suite in Doncaster.
A few other Boston's gigs that we're aware of are Hucknall Lindby Miners Welfare Club, Mandy Workman's Hall, the Bleach Green Labour and Trades Club, the Cock Hotel, and the Aquarius Lincolnshire, where the Glitter Band were to make their solo debut a couple of years later. Another venue where the Bostons and Glitter Band both played was Margate Dreamland. The Bostons even played on Johnny Walker's Radio 1 show. Is he still on air, Andy?
Johnny Walker, yeah, he must be in his early 80s, but I think he does sounds of the 70s on Radio 2 now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, amazing.
A few years before that, Anne listened to his show at work, and she entered the set list into her diary. I mean, Anne's a gem, isn't she, Andy?
Oh, amazing. Thank goodness for fans, like this. It's incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
So the Bostons performed 7 songs on Johnny's programme. First was Tobacco Road, Love the One You're With, She's Not There, Tomorrow is the First Day of the Rest of Your Life, Tomorrow Night, and Simple Game.
And these appear to be all cover versions, but there are a few obscure tracks amongst that lot.
Seem to be, yeah.
Yeah, and they're quite different to the out-and-out pop songs that the Bostons recorded in Germany a few years previously. So maybe newer members Jerry and Harvey were influencing the set list, the song selection?
Yeah, it could well be, yeah. I could see Harvey picking out one of those songs and Jerry picking She's Not There, yeah.
Going through Anne's gig list, what's particularly interesting is that there don't seem to be many shows where Paul Raven is playing with the Bostons. She lists only 2, both in the Hull area. At Malcolm's on November the 4th, 71, and the Mecca 5 days later. It appears that at this time Paul was not happy with the promoters of some of these UK gigs, and his behaviour was becoming erratic, something he freely admitted a few years later.
Yeah, so things came to a head at Nottingham University gig in early 1972. Paul wandered on stage very drunk and was unceremoniously sacked by Boston's manager and agent Peter McLeod. Not a great situation, but if that sacking hadn't happened, there may have been no Glitterband, because Paul then headed to London, and he looked up a producer who he'd made quite a few, albeit unsuccessful, singles with over the previous few years. This was Mike Leander, of course. Fortunately, the stars seemed to align. Mike had recently managed to get out of an unhappy contract with MCA Records, and he'd acquired a new manager in Lawrence Myers. He was the owner of the Gem Production organisation, shortly to be renamed as the Gem Toby organisation, or GTO. Mike had also signed a production deal with Bell Records. The Bell UK label had just become independent of its US parent and had acquired a local managing director, Dick Lee.
All right, so there's a bit in there. So have I got this right? So Mike Landers contracted with MCA Records. Mm-hmm. So he's not happy. So he's acquired a manager who's got him out of a contract with MCA Records. The manager was Lawrence Myers, and who was running his own company. And then Mike's signed a production deal with Bell Records. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it appears that Bell, which had been a US label, had just acquired a local managing director in Dick Lay. Is that roughly right?
Yeah.
Quite a few names in there, Andy.
And obviously, Lawrence Myers' organisation evolved slightly.
Right. So there was a lot of money around at that time, wasn't there?
It seems to have been, yeah, or a will to make things happen.
Yes.
But that would have needed money. It can't all be bullshit, can it?
Yeah, no, you're right. And it sounds like there's some sort of structure amongst all that, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know? On taking over Bell UK, Dick Lay was concerned to discover loads of production deals. To quote Dick, "You've never seen so many deals and so few records." Fortunately, Mike survived the subsequent cull. Lawrence Myers recalls Mike spending a lot of time in London's Mayfair studios with recording engineer John Hudson, who's a critical part of what's become the glitter sound, experimenting. He also has a vivid memory, and you'll love this one, Andy, of Mike Leander sitting in his office using a cigarette lighter to move up and down a guitar fretboard. It appears that the Star guitar sound was well on its way. At the same time, things did seem to be progressing rather slowly. Dick Lay expressed his concerns several times to Lawrence Myers in relation to the cost of Mike's studio work. Fortunately, it appears just in time, Mike had an instrumental backing track prepared. David Essex cancelled the session one evening, and Mike called him Paul Raven. They worked together to create some lyrics and recorded a vocal. Rock and Roll Part 1 was born.
Mike completed the mix and took the tape to Lawrence Myers' office. He also played Lawrence an instrumental version of the track with the vocal sections replaced by guitar, accompanied by hand claps and loads of haze. They both agreed it had B-side potential and it had the added advantage of being cheap.
The name Gary Glitter had been decided upon, but Lawrence Myers was concerned as to whether Paul Raven was the best fit for the character and suggested that a younger singer might be more commercially viable. If that happened, I suppose there'd be no Glitterman, Andy.
No. No.
Hey, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Here's something you weren't expecting. So, Andy, I reckon everyone, including yourself, listening to this podcast would know that song.
Yeah.
Who's the singer?
What are you going to say?
Who's the singer? That's your question.
Well, we know the person as Alvin Stardust.
Okay, yep. And
Or Shane Fenton.
Shane Fenton, right.
Or Bernard Jury.
Right, yep, that's all true. But Andy, he did not sing on that record.
No, okay.
He did. You could see this coming, couldn't you? Yeah. He didn't. It's Pete Shelley, the producer.
Yeah, yeah.
What happened was that Pete Shelley produced the record and then tried to find a singer for it. In the meantime, Magnet, the record label, released it, and he didn't have a singer. So I think he appeared on Liftoff wearing a pink costume, would you believe, in sort of a disguise because he didn't want to play the character. So as Magnet had sort of jumped the gun with the release, he desperately had to find a singer, and he looked up Shane Fenton.
Right, yeah, okay.
But yet, if you hear the song live, Shane Fenton sings it perfectly. So you'd swear it's him on the record, wouldn't you?
Yeah. It's quite stylised, yeah.
Yeah. So did a similar thing almost happen with another record, Andy?
Well, yeah, because Lawrence Myers has claimed in sort of more recent years, I suppose, that Gary didn't sing on Rock and Roll Part 1, and that maybe another singer was tried, although that appears really to be unlikely. It's definitely Gary on the record.
Oh, I second that, Andy. There's no doubt that it is Gary. It's definitely Paul Raven or Gary or whatever you want to call him. That's the person on the record.
Well, unless there are other demos and they went back to Gary, I just don't know. It's a long time ago, isn't it? I don't know that.
Yeah, I reckon there may
Lawrence
not be.
remembers exactly as it is.
There may not be other demos because this information we're getting from Lawrence Myers, that's coming from his book, and he's got a pretty good memory, but I think whatever happened, Mike's plan was for the character to be Paul Raven. I think there's no doubt about that. And that might be part of the reason why he got involved in the writing by actually saying, well, hang on, he's co-written the record, so he has to sing on it. I'm sure that was Mike's plan. Meanwhile, still in the UK, the Bostons, -1, were gigging on. One show of note was at the top-ranked suite in Doncaster, where they were supporting a band that was reasonably well known at the time. That was Slade. Andy, I'm surprised that neither John Russell, Jerry or Harvey seem to have never mentioned that gig.
Yeah, it does seem a bit odd. I think they might have made some connection about it, particularly at that time.
Sure.
But we've got a newspaper article about the Slade gig claiming that it was the Boston's last ballroom show before joining the next Monty Python tour. So that's another news story to us, and just wonder if anybody can help with that. It does seem more likely that they were about to head back to Germany, really. Yeah,
well, I mean, until we found this information, I had never heard about a Monty Python tour, and I would have thought particularly John Russell would have mentioned it, and John never mentioned a Monty Python tour, so I suspect it never happened.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Just before the Bostons did make their way back to Germany, John Russell had what he described as a social meeting, maybe a few pints, with his ex-bandmate Paul Raven in London. Paul mentioned that he had a single coming out. He had quite a few others, but he thought this one, under the name of Gary Glitter, might be a hit.
So 3 months later, in mid-June, the Bostons were back in the UK and on the road. Paul, now obviously known as Gary, left a message at John Russell's mum's house asking for John to call him back urgently. John eventually spoke to an excited Gary. Rock and Roll Part 2 was about to enter the top 30 and a Top of the Pops appearance was imminent. Being an instrumental, he and Mike had decided they needed to perform with a band.
But what if, as intended, this was the hit? If Rock and Roll Part 1 was the hit, a backing band would have helped get the visual element across, but I suppose it wasn't a necessity, Andy.
No, not really. Not 100% necessary.
I mean, it possibly he could have been a solo act like sort of David Essex or someone like that. That could have happened,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, it went in the direction it had because of the big sound of the track, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. With Rock and Roll Part 2, you just needed a band because effectively it's an instrumental, isn't it?
Yeah.
As Rock and Roll Part 2 entered the charts, according to John Russell, he took a couple of days off from his Boston's duties, travelled to London and met with Mike and Gary. As we've mentioned, John had worked with Gary extensively, but he also knew Mike from the start of his career when he was a member of the Mike Landers show band. At the time of the meeting, the Bostons had released 3 albums in Germany and numerous singles to little success. Just about all Boston's recordings were cover versions, but there were 3 instrumentals, all composed by John. He was determined to keep writing and releasing new music. John related to Mike his desire that after Gary was established, the band would not be restricted from making their own records. He also stated that when it came time for the Glittermen to enter the recording studio as a standalone act, there was some resistance. Now, he may not have been speaking about the Glitter Band at that time, Andy. What do you reckon?
No, I'm pretty convinced that on the back of them doing that radio session, those 7 songs and what have you, I think he was thinking of some incarnation of the Bostons or something at that time. Essentially because getting that, it's easy then to say, we were just about to have this success. Give us a chance to do some recording to further that, particularly if this song fails in the charts. You can't get any follow-ups and it's a one-hit wonder.
Well, Rock and Roll Part 2 was a B-side that accidentally became a hit, and it could have been a one-off novelty hit.
Yeah. Taking that thinking into this next bit, for the next few weeks, the Bostons seemed to experience split personality syndrome. While gigging under the Boston International moniker, they were also backing Gary on Top of the Pops, etc. After the first Top of the Pops appearance, Mike felt that a second drummer was required to reinforce the prominent drum sound of Rock and Roll Part 2. A name familiar to many, Jeff Hanlon, recommended a drummer who he knew well, Pete Phipps. Pete was quickly added to the band, debuting on the next Rock and Roll Top of the Pops appearance. A week later, Gary and the band, by then colloquially known as the Glittermen, were to play their first gig at Melksham Assembly Hall. A tour was then organised from the start of August through to the end of the first week in September, but there were a couple of hiccups along the way.
There were. In the couple of weeks between the first Gary Glitter performance and the subsequent tour, the Bostons were back on the road, fulfilling some of their pre-book commitments. During that time, Harvey Ellison was crossing the road and unfortunately broke his leg, though from a report from the time, it appears he may have actually broken both legs. It was clearly a serious injury because Harvey was unable to perform live until early the next year, though during his recuperation, he was able to play on Gary's records. His live and TV appearances replacement was Bob Edmonds. On Harvey's return to the stage, for a short period the brass section grew to 3, and Bob Edmonds even managed to get a tour of Australia.
Shortly after Harvey's accident, there was another change, only 9 shows into the first tour. Quoting drummer Peter Gill, I was asked to go and see the band in Scarborough so I could chat to them. They were obviously fantastic, but at the time they weren't known and didn't mean anything to me. They finished their set, the crowd was going wild for an encore, and the tour manager came rushing over and said, "Just follow me." He ushered me through the crowd, and it quickly became apparent that the other drummer had collapsed after the show. He said, "You're going on." And the other drummer, Pete Phipps, said, "Follow me." I had no nerves in those days and thought, well, just bring it on. When Gary came on, he did a double take when he saw me sat behind the kit thinking, who the is this?
That is a great story. And it dovetails with a story I heard a few years ago, that while John White loved playing with the Bostons, he didn't at all like the frenzied atmosphere surrounding the early Glitter gigs. I suppose that's something you either love or hate. The tour finished just as the second Gary Glitter single, I Didn't Know I Loved You Till I Saw You Rock and Roll, was released. You'd think that was a straightforward decision, a similar type sounding single as a follow-up to the hit, but with vocals. Not quite. Dick Lee at Bell, who had a reputation for picking the hits, wasn't convinced. He pushed and pushed strongly for this song to be the second Gary Glitter single. On this occasion, it seems that Dick's hit record Antennae may have deserted him. But if The Wanderer was a hit, it seems Gary may not have needed a band for his subsequent TV appearances. Okay, I'm making an assumption there. But it might have made it a bit more difficult to get the Glitter Band off the ground.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that track is diametrically in opposition to the rock and roll song, whether it's part one or part two. Yeah, part one or part two. You know, it's just much more massive and unique than just going for a hit like, you know, a rehash of The Wanderer. You know, if they beefed up the drums and changed the guitar and stuff, it would have been a different matter. But yeah, just putting it out like that would just been a total incongruous. It would have been incongruous to those songs or to that song.
It almost sounds like something he could have been doing in the Paul Raven days.
Yeah.
There were to be a couple more changes before the final Glitter Band lineup was locked in, but I think the next one is more a funny story rather than an actual change. Ray Moxley departed after the first tour, just before I Didn't Know I Loved You was to enter the charts. With the Top of the Pops appearance looming, a new bass player was required. Albert Darley, who it seems couldn't play bass, was co-opted for one day. Albert remembers his rather short career as a Glitter Band member well, recalling several Top of the Pops appearances of I Didn't Know I Loved You being recorded prior to one of them going to air on the 21st of September edition, presented by Ed Stewart. The surviving recording, which you can find on YouTube, was the second and the better, as the producer felt that the band were not relaxed enough on the initial one. The first recorded performance may have appeared on a later Top of the Pops. Andy, I think I've seen a photo of Albert Darley with the band, and that must have been taken backstage at Top of the Pops. I suppose he earned his wages that day. Auditions were then conducted for a real bass player in John Rossell's then hometown, Sheffield.
So a fella by the name of John Springate had been working consistently.
Heard of him?
Yeah. For the previous few years, both in the UK and Canada. But he'd just left his current band. He was looking through the Melody Maker one day and found an ad. Bass player vocals wanted for hit group. John rung up and spoke to tour manager Steve Hackett, who suggested that he watch I Didn't Know I Loved You on Top of the Pops that evening. John watched the performance and one name came to mind, Benny Hill.
Oh, that's not good.
The next day, Steve Hackett rang John back and said, "Are you coming up?" As you know, he agreed. There were quite a few bass players at that audition. John Rossell recalled, there may have been a couple of better bass players. It's a bit harsh, doesn't he, saying really, at the audition, but John was helped by his height, which was similar to guitarist Jerry Shepherd at about 5'5". JR also talked about John Springate giving him a cassette of some of his songs. He was impressed with Springy's songwriting ability. Combined with Springy being an excellent singer, his addition augured well for the future of the Glitter Band.
It seems that Springy may not have quite experienced the baptism of fire of other recent band additions. His first commitment appeared to be a TV appearance on German TV's Disco 72 performing Rock and Roll that went to air in mid-October. We played part of that recording at the start of this podcast. The initial run of Gary Glitter performances had sold out all over the UK, but the show was off the road at that time, while Gary's management organised a tour of larger venues, including venturing into Europe. It was to be 2.5 months later before Gary and the Glitter Band next got together, performing on the New Year's edition of Top of the Pops. The Glitter Band, or Glittermen, lineup had settled down and was to remain stable for the next year or so.
We've mentioned that Mike played all instruments on the Gary Glitter records, which, with the exception of the brass parts, which on most of the records were played by John Russell and Harvey Ellison. That was for the records, but the Musicians' Union had a rule for Top of the Pops and other performances that those appearing on the show must have played on the records. Some of Gary's TV performances at that time were complete re-recordings, while others were parts of the original track, with some sections being replaced. Others are obviously the original recording. According to Harvey Ellison, there was a bit of tape swapping going on. There was also Gary's first album, Glitter.
Now, Andy, you've mentioned to me before that you feel, and I agree, although I'm not a guitarist, but it appears that some of the guitar parts on that album may not have been able to be played by Mike, possibly. He may have needed another guitarist.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Which we think may have been Jerry, but we've got no evidence for that, have we?
No, but it makes sense that it was him, really.
Well, I guess he was around at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah.
A few years ago, to my surprise, I should say welcome surprise, JR told the story of a recording session in Hamburg in early January 73. The Glittermen were playing a show with Gary. While they were there, they went into a studio and played on 2 tracks that were to appear on the Touch Me album. This one, could that be Pete Phipps playing piano, Andy?
It could be, yeah. I have to ask him. There's so many things to ask John and Pete. There really are. Got to get round to that.
We got one more. I could do without the fake crowd noise, but maybe Mike used it because the Glitter Band were playing live in the studio.
Yeah.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
The star guitar playing is quite different to other Gary Glitter tracks of that time. It's more fluid, looser, and I love it.
Yeah, it's Jerry playing on that. Apart from one other song, these were to be the only cover versions on Touch Me. Unlike the rest of that album's material, the band had been playing the songs in concert. It probably made sense to use the well-rehearsed Glittermen on the studio recordings.
The Glitter Band spent most of 1973 either on the road with Gary touring the UK, Europe, Scandinavia and Australia, or in TV studios as part of his numerous television appearances. Despite their gruelling schedule, in mid-October they had a few days free between a Scandinavian tour and their second trip to Australia for the year. After a little persuasion, Mike agreed to book a session at Mayfair Studios, Mike's London recording base, with engineer John Hudson.
A tape containing 3 songs was subsequently handed over to Mike. Before we talk about his response, let's listen to the tracks recorded at that session. they're not finished recordings. They're only supposed to be heard by Mike and maybe Bell Records' Dick Leahy. They weren't intended for our ears, but we are very grateful for the person who's allowed us to hear the songs. Recordings such as these are known as demos or demonstrations for a reason. They're not perfect, but they don't have to be. For most acts, embryonic recordings such as these either have been erased or thrown out or kept under lock and key, so I think we're lucky. If you listen closely to the start of the next track, you'll hear John Russell checking that engineer John Hudson is recording. It's not great quality, there are a few crackles, but it's not about the recording, it's about the song.
All right, John. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Each night we have a quarrel, it always breaks my heart, and I am so afraid that we will have to part. Each night I ask the stars up above, why must I be a teenager in love?
So this song, Teenager in Love, was apparently considered to be re-recorded for Hey, but they decided to go with Sealed with a Kiss instead, which I think I'd probably rather have had Teenager in Love in some ways, but hey. Hey.
Look, I'm not quite as keen as the song as you are, Andy, and I would have gone with Sealed with a Kiss, but I suspect you're probably in the majority. Here's another one from the session, and this is an early Shepherd Springate composition.
Dancing, everybody's dancing, dancing the night away, romancing, loving and a chancing, romancing the same old way. I'm walking over you with my blue suede shoes. You know I gotta move. You know I'm in the groove. You really move your hips so I can kiss your lips and groove. Drinking, smoking and a drinking, thinking the same old way.
Dancing is one of a couple of unreleased Glittermen songs that features Jerry singing part of the song, while John Springate handles the other section. I think it's a shame that didn't happen on any of their official releases. I don't mind this song, maybe at 50-ish, and there seem to be two separately written verses that have been sewn together but no chorus. I get the impression that Glittermen were trying something a little different to what Bell Records and maybe Mike probably expected. Andy, did Jerry reuse his section on another unreleased song sometime later?
Yes, he did. So that's Wheels Keep Turning, I think. It's interesting, that 50s vibe, because obviously Teenager in Love is almost like Happy Days type vibe, isn't it?
Oh,
I
yeah,
see
definitely.
why Sealed with a Kiss might have been a better choice in many ways. Yeah, just interesting, really, to see what they were trying to put together. It's just experimenting, I guess. So here's another song that listeners will know, but maybe not this version.
Walking up your garden, I'm knocking on your door. I got the strangest feeling I've been here before. There's footsteps in the hallway, tripping through the dark. The little one here
I like this song. It's obviously the pick for a possible single release out of the three, but I think there was better to come. The only problem is that it seems to sound too much like a Gary Glitter song and production.
Yeah, so maybe more like a Gary Glitter song, I guess, and production. But anyway, You Wouldn't Leave Me, Would You, was presented to Mike Leander as a possible single. There have been various reports of Mike's response. One was, "You've wasted my time." From what we've heard about Mike, that sounds a little bit strong, but You Wouldn't Leave Me, Would You was not going to be the Glitterband's first single. Shortly after their initial recording session, the band was at their Sheffield base rehearsing in a garage. Another song started to come together, with Pete Phipps laying down the riff on piano. The Glitterband returned to Mayfair and put down another demo.
We'll tell that story in our next podcast. Suffice to say, Mike was happy with what he heard, but suggested a few changes would be needed before he considered the song to be commercially viable. Composers John Rossell and Jerry Shepherd took his advice on board. In the meantime, Mike suggested arranging their first tour. The tour wouldn't be straight away. The Glitterband had extensive commitments with Gary for the next couple of months. In particular, they were about to leave for a short Australian tour. All the shows were sellouts. The promoter wanted an extension, but it wasn't possible because Gary and the band had to return to the UK for the release of I Love You Love Me Love, an accompanying tour, which was also a sellout, and included a couple of shows that were filmed at London's Rainbow Theatre. They even managed to nip over to France, performing at Paris's famous Olympia Theatre.
On their return from Australia, there was to be a final change to the band's lineup. The band were now officially known as the Glitterband rather than the Glittermen. Pete Gill, who went on to pursue quite a career with Saxon and Motorhead, departed the band. It appears he left with no animosity, as Pete has spoken fondly of his time with the Glitterband. A new drummer was needed, and quickly. Pete Phipps told the story. "We thought we'd get about 30 replies to the advertisement we put in one of the big music papers, but no way. Literally, thousands of people seemed to want the job. It was almost impossible sorting through them all. Eventually we got the number down to about 300, and after lots of auditioning we chose Tony Leonard. We were worn out at the end of it, I can tell you."
Looking at the Glitterman's immediate commitments through to mid-January the next year, baptism of fire seems to be almost an understatement. We won't go through Tony's background now, but in common with all other Glitterband members, we plan to in the future. Suffice to say, at the age of 21 or 22, he'd had quite an employment history, and not just in music. Andy, I think Tony's audition may have been filmed. Have you seen that brief sequence in Remember Me This Way, where he seems to be showing off his skills?
Yeah, I have, yeah. So you're thinking that might have been his audition,
Well, I think
or just after. Yeah.
It does look like he's not playing a song, obviously. He's showing off his skills. So,
I thought he was playing Happy Birthday or something.
yeah, but there's also another piece. It only goes for a few seconds where he's just sort of playing he's just playing.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
He's, maybe it is Happy Birthday. What's interesting is you see him and not Pete. So it does look like you might be right. Maybe it's his first rehearsal or something like that.
Yeah, could be.
We haven't been able to find much about the first Glitterband tour. We both remember seeing a review of their debut performance at the Aquarius Club in Lincoln, but haven't been able to locate it. I do remember reading that they performed Let's Dance, a song they never went on to record, near the start of their set. We have the tour dates. We'll run through them. Hopefully there might be a couple of listeners who were there. First one, Lincoln Aquarius Club.
Then there's Doncaster Side Saddle Country Club,
The Victory Club at Portsmouth,
Cleethorpes Pier Pavilion,
Gore Viking Hotel,
Barnsley Civic Hall,
Floral Hall at Hornsey,
and Leisure Centre at Raw Marsh,
the Buckley Tivoli,
Bourne Corn Exchange,
Kettering Central Hall.
Margate Dreamland,
Gee, that's a big venue. Shrewsbury Tiffany's,
Wrexham Fagans Club,
Bolton, Nevada,
Blackpool Locarno.
Eli the Maltings, and there's one more that we know of.
The band returned to Margate in early February, only a few weeks after their New Year's Eve show. We may not have been able to find the review of the Aquarius Club show, but we do have the Disc Magazine review of this second Margate gig. It's rather long, so we'll post it on a couple of Glitterband Facebook sites. There is one quote from the review which might serve as a teaser for our next episode. The latter is to be the band's first solo single, and if ever it was a hit in the works, this is it.
I reckon that may have been the first time they played this mystery song live. We always like to finish our shouted out episodes with some music. In this case, it's a little difficult as we don't have any live recordings from the first Glitterband tour. But there is Remember Me This Way, the live Gary Glitter album recorded only a few weeks before, which the Glitterband featured on. We've decided to play part of Baby Please Don't Go, which features some pretty nifty soloing from Harvey Ellison. The Glittermen have been playing a lot of gigs over the last year. It showed.